Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. How about this for a piece of news? So for weeks now, we obviously, look, we did so much on the Oregon, Washington, and the Big Ten, so much on Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah to the Big 12. And the big question over the last couple of weeks has been what happens to the remaining four schools in the Pac-4, Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. A few weeks ago, obviously the rumor started, could the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, actually be in the mix for Cal and Stanford? And we later learned maybe SMU as well. It seemed absurd at the time. It seemed like it wasn't going to happen. And then all of a sudden the presidents get back together and vote on Friday morning. Many of you probably woke up to this news. I know that I did. So let me just explain what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. Now, first off, obviously, look, we know what happened with the Pac-12. We don't need to relitigate all of that. But as I said, when the Pac-12 broke up, there were these early rumors that the ACC could be interested in adding Cal and Stanford and SMU. And the question became, why would Cal and Stanford and SMU be of any interest to the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, the home of Duke and North Carolina and Coach K and Roy Williams and Bobby Bowden? Why would they want Stanford and Cal and SMU? Well, like so many things in life, and like so many things certainly in college sports, all you got to do is, I'm going to do the Johnny Manziel, just follow the money, baby. All you got to do is follow the money, and that is exactly where all of this came from. A few weeks ago that we found out that the ACC, per their contract with ESPN has exclusive rights to the ACC. If the ACC adds any new schools, they get up to $17 million more per year per school if they add schools. And so initially, the ACC did not get the necessary votes for this to happen. At the time, they needed 12 of 15 votes. When they did the first vote about 3-4 weeks ago, they needed 12 of 15 schools to approve, but 4 decided against it. Those 4 were NC State, UNC, Clemson, and Florida State. Fast forward a couple weeks, and my understanding is NC State was the one to flip, and for very good reason. The reason NC State flipped is pretty straightforward. Is if you don't add, basically by adding schools, in theory, it's a strength in numbers thing in case other schools try to break off. And so I think what NC State kind of figured out here over the last couple of days was, if we don't vote to expand and the ACC breaks up, we could be kind of screwed. Clemson's going to be fine. Florida State's going to be fine. UNC is going to be fine. Some of these other schools are going to be fine. But we could be in trouble. NC State flips, and NC State is ultimately the vote that ended up deciding that these 3 schools were going to come to the ACC. All the other schools, Wake Forest, Duke, whoever, Georgia Tech, Boston College, etc., they had already voted in favor of it. NC State was the one who flipped. So ultimately, the question now becomes, why was this done? Why now? And what benefits does it have for everybody? Well, I will say, even though it's a little bit kooky, and we're going to get to that, there are some inherent benefits for all parties involved. I think we look specifically at the schools, but from ESPN's perspective, I talked to somebody about this on Friday morning, thought this was an interesting comment. ESPN right now is blocked out of any West Coast sports and any West Coast football. The Pac-12 disintegrated. ESPN does not have rights to the Big 10 or the Big 12. And so by adding Cal and Stanford, they now have a West Coast window where they can broadcast some games. Now, listen, is Duke Stanford, is it going to be the highest rated college football game in the history of college football? No, of course not. But it was important for them to have a West Coast presence. Now, I will add, I still believe now that the Big Ten has another 2 West Coast schools, ESPN is ultimately going to try to get a Big Ten TV package for those late night 10:30 Eastern time kickoffs. But this at least gives you a little bit of wiggle room in terms of having some presence on the West Coast. As I joked with a buddy of mine on Friday morning, Bill Walton, back from the dead. We thought he had nothing to broadcast. He's going to be spending a lot of time at Cal and Stanford over these next couple of years. So for ESPN, it makes sense. For the ACC, here's why it actually makes sense. Is because remember, all summer long, and really, I think it was dating back to like February, we heard all this consternation specifically from Florida State about TV money. How by being in this long-standing ACC TV contract that runs through 2036, they're kind of screwed, they're in trouble, and there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do to match Florida and Georgia and all these schools that they're competing with in the SEC. So they're already behind, and as the years go on, they're going to fall further and further and further behind. And so now the way that this works is pretty straightforward, and this is maybe the most interesting part of why this deal was approved. One, all these schools bring in more money to the ACC, but here's where it gets interesting. All these schools are not taking a full TV share. Stanford and Cal are taking 30% of a TV share. So instead of getting that 17 million or whatever it is, I think it's 24 million, I think, whatever it is, the 17, they're getting 30% of a normal ACC TV share. Cal, Stanford. Then here's the kicker. SMU has decided, and SMU is going to be in the ACC. They have decided they want to be in a power conference so bad. SMU is taking zero TV money for like the next 8 or 9 years. That is insane. That is the most alpha move that I have ever. They're like, we're so rich. We got so much money. We don't care. Just get us in the ACC. I personally think it's kind of crazy because their football stadium isn't huge. Their basketball team isn't going to sell out for anybody other than when Duke is in town. So I don't know where all this revenue is coming from, but apparently they have so much money they don't care. So from the ACC's perspective, it makes sense because now you get tens of millions of dollars extra to throw back into the coffers because those schools aren't taking a full TV share. And so because of it, now the way they're going to do it, they're going to reward the big football schools. If you win the ACC, you're going to get extra TV money that's left over because Cal and Stanford aren't taking a full share and SMU is taking no money at all. FSU, if they make the college football playoff, win the ACC, they're going to get extra money every year. Now, it'd be applicable for a Clemson, a Miami, a Pitt, a whoever wins the league, but obviously FSU is the one that you're trying to keep happy. And then finally, from the Cal, Stanford, and SMU perspective, it's a no-brainer. Cal and Stanford get to kind of maintain that power conference status. I almost called it Power 5, but the Pac-12 is down to 2 schools now. So I guess it's just a Power 4. And then beyond that, obviously SMU is just thrilled to be part of a power conference as it is. So that's why it makes sense for everybody, why it makes sense for ESPN, why it makes sense for the ACC. Those big football schools are going to get extra money. And for Cal, Stanford, SMU, it's a little bit of stability. That's what happened on Friday. Let's talk going forward. And let me explain. I don't really think this is a very good thing overall. So a couple thoughts on just what it means for the ecosystem of college sports. Okay. So one, first of all, I don't know. This is what's the old saying? A Band-Aid on a bullet hole, a bullet wound, whatever. This ultimately doesn't solve the ACC's problem. Florida State getting a bunch more money, if they're good in football, it doesn't solve the fundamental problem that they don't want to be there. It doesn't solve the fundamental problem that UNC knows it has options, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC, should the ACC break up. Same with Clemson. I don't know if Clemson would make sense for the ACC or the Big Ten, excuse me. But I bring it up because it's clear that even with this extra money, I don't think it fundamentally changes anything. You know how I know? It's because hours before this vote, North Carolina's Board of Trustees released a statement. They said, we do not approve of this expansion. Florida State, after the news became official, released a statement. We do not approve of this expansion. That is completely unprecedented in the world of conference realignment and conference expansion, okay? When Texas and Oklahoma went to the SEC, it was a unanimous vote. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. When the Big 12 added those 3 schools, Arizona State, Arizona, and Utah, obviously Colorado before, everybody was on board, everybody approved, and obviously the same in the Big 10 with the 2 schools they added last summer, USC and UCLA, and the schools they added this summer in Washington and Oregon. And so I just bring it up because Florida State and UNC basically said, we do not approve of this at all. And so I don't think it's going to stop Florida State from trying to get out of the out of the ACC. And I don't think it's going to stop them, right? They're the school that has looked into hedge fund money. They're the school that is trying desperately to get out of this grant of rights. Eventually, they're going to figure it out. And eventually, other schools like a North Carolina, like a Clemson, are going to follow. So while this might seem good on paper and we give all this extra money to this and that, and Florida State gets it, it won't matter because they're trying to get out. Beyond that, you know who I actually felt really bad for? You know what my first thought was when I saw this news? My first thought, I felt bad for Oregon State and Washington State, okay? Because here's the bottom line. Imagine being Oregon State and Washington State. Oregon State is a top 20 team coming into this year. They're coming off a 10-win season. Washington State is coming off an 8-win season and a bowl game. They're left out in the dark with nowhere to go. They're going to end up in the Mountain West. Cal and Stanford, they get a life raft for no reason other than they're willing to give up money, and that's the disappointing part. Cal and Stanford, at least in the major sports, they haven't even tried to compete over the last couple of years, okay? Stanford football program is rudderless. Basketball program, respectfully, I hear Jared Haas is a great guy. 7 straight years, no NCAA tournaments, and he gets brought back for another year. Cal has not tried. They haven't tried to win in power conference sports. And so don't sell me, well, Stanford, I mean, the Olympic sports are so great. Yeah, I'm sorry, respectfully. I don't care about Stanford women's water polo. I'm sure they're great girls. But in major college sports, they haven't tried, and they get a life raft while Oregon State and Washington State, trying like hell, are being squeezed out. Finally, let me just say this, and this is the part I think we all agree on. College sports is so out of control, man. And first of all, I'm a UConn alum. Remember like a month ago when it was absurd that UConn even wanted to consider going to the Big 12? Why would you go to the Big 12? The geography doesn't make sense anymore. Nothing makes sense. And I know that this is a very cliche take. I know it's very obvious. I know there's nothing unique about it. But it is jarring to me how college sports is just a complete free-for-all right now. I know everybody says it, but there's no leadership. There's no accountability. Everybody's stabbing themselves in the back. Geography makes absolutely no sense anymore. It is insanity. Think about it. The Atlantic Coast Conference just added Cal and Stanford. What are we even doing? And that's obviously in response to the Big Ten adding USC and UCLA, Oregon and Washington. Doesn't make sense. There's no geographic continuity to it. And it's just about survival of the fittest. It's about trying to have a chair at the table when all the dust settles. But we don't think about anything other than football. It's insane to me. I saw one report that what they may do in the ACC, they may have big Olympic sport events in Dallas. What do I mean by that? Is that they may have like a mid-season tournament in Dallas just so that all these schools can get all these games in without Cal and Stanford having to fly across country 15 times a year for Olympic sports. You know how insane that is? You know how little that makes sense? Imagine being a softball player. You work your whole life for the opportunity to get a scholarship to a place like Stanford, a place like Duke, a place like Cal, a place like wherever. And you can't play in front of your friends and family. You got to go to Dallas and play 8 games in 7 days to fit it in the schedule. Like, what are we even doing here? Forget about the football and basketball for a second. It's insanity. And so I go back to what I said, and I think I said this. I can't remember. We talked so much about so many different things over the last month. I thought the smartest take that I saw on realignment was actually from Chip Kelly, the UCLA football coach. He said Notre Dame is independent in football, and they're in a conference that geographically makes sense for everything else. We should all be independent in football and be in conferences geographically that make sense for everybody else. And I thought that was the sharpest, smartest thing that I have heard so far in all of this realignment talk. Because at the end of the day, like, what are we even doing here, right? Like, we are in a world where, again, Duke basketball is going to be playing at Cal. Like, what are we even doing? It's insanity. It's so weird. And I know I'm not the first person to say this. I just hope we get to the finish line soon, right? The finish line of college football. I think that, and I do think the finish line is College football does kind of its own thing. Whatever it is, 20 teams, 25 teams, 30, 35, 40, whatever it is, that number. They play their championship. Maybe there's a lower level below that. And then let everybody else just play sports in normal geographic footprints that make sense. It doesn't make sense to have Cal, forget even like women's swimming and diving. It doesn't make sense for Cal basketball to have to fly to Boston to play Boston College and then Syracuse to play Syracuse. It doesn't make sense for Georgia Tech to have to fly to the Bay Area to play conference games. It makes no sense. And it's just so disappointing that the leadership has allowed it to get here. All right. I think that's it for this bonus episode.